Howdy, everyone. All right, well, I'm back in the shop and I am making some progress on this manual flap conversion finally. So again, this is the center console that I had made, or the center tunnel cover, if you will, that I custom made. I've got my latching, I don't know what you want to call this. I'll worry about it later. But this is in place, and you can see that I've got my holes drilled and they're dimpled. And I've got everything held together with clecos on the back side. So this has been fitted to the airplane and it works. The flap handle tracks along here nicely. There's no interference. There's no binding or anything like that. So I finally got that figured out. You can see I made a new piece. Here's the old one. I kept fooling with this and cutting it and fooling it and cutting it and putting new holes in it and screwing it up, and finally got it to the point where it's just too darn short. So this is trash. Here's my new piece, which of course is not cut to length yet. So now that I had the actual flap mechanism bolted to the airplane, I had this clecoed in place, I had this clecoed in place, I made sure that everything worked the way it's supposed to work. So then, while everything was in place, so here's the handle. I'm just going to slide this in here, hopefully it will go. All right. So while everything was in place in the airplane, I went ahead and I clocked this sleeve where I wanted it. So I have it set up so the top two holes, these holes here and these holes here, I just clocked it so those are basically on top. I didn't want to have a hole basically running center line with the slot. I wanted to have the holes basically straddling center. So I clocked the sleeve, and then of course the handle gets clocked by this piece running up through the slit. So with this piece running up through the slot, that basically indexes the rotation of the handle. So with everything in place, I marked a couple of holes on the handle side of the sleeve, and I marked a couple of holes on the mechanism, if you will. I don't know what the hell to call this. I forget what the part number is. But after I had the holes marked, made sure everything was clocked the way I wanted it. I got the holes marked. Everything worked, as I said. Took it all apart, and now I'm match drilling holes. So you can see I've got the bottom side of this sleeve match drilled all the way around to this provided weldment. Now I'm going to go ahead and match drill the handle to the weldment. Now, like I said, while it was in the airplane, I marked the holes. I marked a couple of holes. You can see there. The one that's drilled, I marked with a drill bit like I usually do. And the hole next to it, I just marked with a Sharpie, which I'm not going to use. I just made the one hole here. I had marked it as I always do, with it in place. Put a drill bit through the existing hole and twist it to leave a mark on this piece. And then I went ahead and drilled it. Now with this hole drilled, I put this in. I'll run a cleco through here, and then I'll go ahead and match drill the other holes just as they are. After that's done, I've got a note here about deburring these holes. So I'll do that on both legs. Clean up everything really nice, make sure there are no shavings inside anything. And then I think I'll start working on the mechanism that goes in here, the spring-loaded latch mechanism that goes in here. I started on that, but I have to finish it. I have to make sure I get it cut to the right length and different things. So I'm going to work on that next, and then once I have the latch mechanism working, then I can take everything back out to the airplane. I'll go back out in the garage. I'll assemble everything and then figure out where on here I want to cut my notches for that latch mechanism to lock into to set my flap settings. All right, let me get to drilling some holes and I will talk to you guys later. Howdy everyone. Still in the shop. I'm still working on this flap mechanism stuff. So as you can see, I've got the handle in place, nothing's riveted, but all of these holes are now drilled and the handle is in place. That's ready to rivet, but I'm going to hold off on that yet until I get these internal parts figured out. So that's what I'm working on now. This is the drawing that I have for the RV6. This is they call it the flap handle mechanism. This is the drawing that shows you how to make all the pieces parts for the manual flaps. What I'm working on is basically this piece right here, and this is broken down into individual pieces on the print. Basically it is this. This is what I have so far. Now I've modified my making of this. As of right now, I have a larger diameter tube. I believe, what does this call for? I don't recall what this calls for, but this is a 1/2 inch tube, which is a larger diameter, a little bit more robust. The strap pieces here, I believe I have also made them slightly bigger. I'm looking at the drawing here. I believe that the drawing has you make these at 7/8 wide and then have them taper down to 3/4. I think I maintained 7/8 the whole way. I think I used the same thickness as shown on the drawing, so the thickness of the material is no different, but I just maintained a wider depth or a wider width for the entire length. Again, larger diameter tubing. I used a solid aluminum spacer block and I riveted that with solid rivets. This bolt is the catch mechanism. This is what actually latches into the individual notches that will be cut into this piece. Something to keep in mind is that this piece, this gap here between the catch bolt and the end of your tubing, that space in there needs to be wide enough to fit around this. So let me get that on here. Now the end of this is a little bit big because I haven't shaped it yet. This is all going to get cut off. But you can see how that slides on here. And one thing to keep in mind, I don't have any notches cut into this. You can see the bolt inside the notch is resting against this edge. And you can see I have just a little bit of space, maybe 1/8 of an inch between this edge and the end of the tube. So there's not a lot of gap in there right now. However, when you have the notch cutouts, the bolt will recess itself into that notch, which is going to open up this gap. And that basically gives you the feel when you're on this end of the handle and you're pushing the button, this whole mechanism moves. And if you want just barely a little bit of movement, or if you want a lot of movement, that is dictated by the length of this slot right here. So I've got about 1/8 of an inch of clearance now. The notch has got to be at least 3/16 of an inch deep. I believe that's correct. Basically the diameter of the bolt. So I'm going to get another 3/16 of an inch depth. I could go deeper than that depending on what kind of feel I want for that push button. So 3/16 and 1/8 is what? Just over 1/4 of an inch of travel with the push button. So we'll see. We'll see if I like that. But if I want more travel when I push that button. If it seems too sensitive, I can just slit this a little bit deeper. And then I've got to push the button further to disengage it from that notch. So keep that in mind. That's all dictated by the width of this slit in this piece. Okay? So next up is, try to get this off of here. Oh, that's the other thing too. This is cut with it being a little bit wider. You want to make sure that it fits inside your tube. Try to get a better angle here. So you want to make sure that this slides in here just as it should without binding, because this has to go all the way back and line up with the slit that's in your handle. So this is ultimately going to be about like that. And then between the end of this piece where I have that aluminum block, from the end of this inside of here where this tubing crosses, so there's this tubing passes through the handle in here. From that point to the aluminum block on this piece, that's the distance you have to fit your spring mechanism. And I'll get to that when I get to that. All right, so this is still work in progress. You can see I got to cut this tube down quite a bit, but it seems to be working well so far, and it's a little bit more robust than what the plans have shown. So far so good. Talk to you later. A couple more things I want to mention. When you look at the plans for the RV6 manual flap mechanism, these strap pieces that I had talked about, you can see how they have them bent here to fit over top of the end of the tubing, which would be shown here. What I had decided to do, rather than doing multiple bends on my straps, I just tapered the tubing. I put a little bit of a taper on each strap, and then I tapered the tubing, and then I riveted right as you see here. Now I used 4 individual rivets. 3 of them are LP4, is that right? LP4-3. Let me make sure that's right. It was LP4-3. I keep my rivets over here, don't ask me why. So I used LP4-3, and then I had also used an AD-41. I guess that's what that is. These are basically the same as the LP4-3, basically, but they're shorter. And I used one of those short rivets because with the tube being tapered, you don't have enough room to run another LP4-3. So this rivet here and this rivet here are both LP4-3s. You have enough room to put one in, and then the other one will go in just fine because you've got this width here. So those are LP4-3s. Now on the tapered part where it gets thinner, I started with an LP4-3, but you can't get another one in from the other side. There's just no room for it to fit all the way in. So this is the shorter, whatever I said that was. I don't even remember. So this is the only odd rivet. All right. So if you taper your tubing, you're going to have to modify your rivet selection a little bit to get all 4 of them to fit in there. Okay. Moving on. Howdy, everyone. So obviously I'm back out in the garage at the airplane. I've got my custom-made tunnel cover in place, and I've got the arched piece of metal in place. Of course, I've got the weldment temporarily bolted in place. I went ahead and verified that everything is still level. I went ahead and verified that the ailerons are in trail with the wing. I still have my reference wood pieces in place on both wings. So at this point, basically all I had done was I bring the flaps all the way up to the full retracted position, which of course moved the handle, and then I just laid a mark across the top of the handle onto this piece using a Sharpie. And then I dropped them all the way down to the full 45 degrees and made another mark just across the top of the handle onto this piece. And then I also repositioned the flaps to the 40 degree mark, or the 40 degrees, and then made a mark on the handle. So I've got my fully retracted position, my 40 degree position, and 45 degree position marked out on this piece. Now I checked the flaps. I basically used the left flap as the reference flap. This is the flap I did my measurements off of. But I did, every time I changed its position, I did compare it to the other side. And it's off a little bit. It's less than a degree between the two. But after I get the notches cut into this and I get some more things riveted so it's a little bit more stable, I can lock it in each position and then adjust the linkages here to get both flaps to match a little bit better if I want to. So now that I've got my couple of reference marks laid out, I'm going to take this back apart, take it back into the shop. I'm going to divide between the marks equally and add a couple more for my different flap positions, and then I'll start notching. So let me get this removed, take it into the shop, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Howdy everyone. Back in the shop, I've got this piece out. You can see these lines here. These are the lines that I had marked real time while this piece was still in the airplane out in the garage. Now if you remember, the way that I had done those, the handle, of course, was in place, and the best that I could do was to mark along the top of the slit to mark these lines for the different locations of the flap settings. So in order for the latching mechanism to engage at the right location on here, I have to find the midpoint of this piece, this handle piece. Obviously this slides inside the handle, roughly centered. So since this is a 1-inch piece of tubing, I just came down from my existing marks and I just came down a 1/2 inch and made another little mark. So the center line for this trace is this little tick mark, and the center line for this is this tick mark, and then the center line for this is this little mark here. So I'm going to extend these little marks across a little ways, and then I'll take these two locations here, this little one and this little one, I'll take those and divide in between how many other flap positions I want to put in. All right, so let me get working on this. I'll get some notches cut and we'll see how it looks.